Hi guys, Rukshan here and thanks for joining me for this video. Today I'm going to be looking at the government's advertising campaign. In particular, one of the ads that they released yesterday, which has caused quite a bit of controversy in the country. A lot of mixed reactions to this ad from all different sides of the spectrum. Now I'm going to play the ad, and many of you have probably already seen this, and I did make a skit version of this yesterday as well, but this is the actual ad that the government is playing in parts of Australia.
Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
Alright, so it's a very simple ad in terms of the visuals, right? You just got this one shot, young lady, it looks like she's finding it difficult to breathe, and I think the impression here is that she's got COVID and she's struggling to breathe, but it's not very clear, right? She could be having some sort of panic attack, an anxiety attack, it could be anything. But I think that what the government wants us to take away from this is that this young woman, who is not the normal demographic that you'd associate with having issues with the virus, is on some sort of medical contraption. She's finding it difficult to breathe, and maybe if she had stayed at home, if she had listened to the government, if she had had her vaccine, maybe she would not be in this predicament. That's the main thing I think this ad is trying to tell us, in no uncertain ways. It's very kind of in your face, right? Whereas the other ad that they released, which is just people getting jabs in their arm, that was more of like a toned down version of about encouraging people to get the vaccine, and that hasn't really gained much traction. A lot of people just ignored that completely, and really been taken aback by this ad for all sorts of different reasons. And I think one of the main reasons is that it does come across as propaganda. Now, all advertising is some sort of propaganda. There's someone trying to sell you something, right? But this one clearly comes across as some sort of government propaganda to push their vaccine and push their messaging. And the reason that I'm comfortable to call this what it is, which is propaganda from the government, is because they're targeting this commercial, this ad, specifically at the population in Sydney right now who are in lockdown, who are under very harsh restrictions at the moment inside their homes. These are people that, if we listen to the New South Wales Police, shouldn't even leave home to buy a pair of shoes. So Sydney is in a strict lockdown. Now, why would the government then just direct this particular ad towards that audience? People locked in their houses, this ad comes on, it's to elicit fear, it's to make them feel like, the only way out of this is to go get this vaccine. So is it effective in that sense? Possibly. I think a lot of people might come to the conclusion that this ad is effective. My opinion is that I don't think it's effective, because it's only appealing to the same type of people who are, taken in by this fear, right? Those people most likely have already at some point tried to get a vaccine, have registered to get a vaccine. They probably do the right things as the government wants them to do. They listen to the government. In Victoria, we would call them I Stand With Dan fans. And I think even the general population, a lot of people would be trying to do these things. So that audience already knows that they should be doing this. The people who are, hesitant or anti-vaccination or whatever you want to call them, I don't think this kind of campaign necessarily works on them. This just reaffirms that the government's trying to push these things by scaring them. And I think this approach that the government's taken really just looks at the Australian population as being people who are easily manipulated by fear. I don't necessarily think that's the case. A lot of people in this country don't fall for this kind of thing. I think the government has really misread the room in trying to do this type of advertisement. Now, notwithstanding the use of fear, a lot of commentary online that I've seen from other sources, even on television segments on this particular ad, talk about how it's unrealistic in terms of what would actually be happening for someone in this scenario. and the type of care they would be receiving in an Australian hospital, that they would probably necessarily not be left to be, in this state where they're trying to breathe and stuff like in this manner when they're in a hospital. That's one discussion that I've seen. The other discussion is like the whole medical procedure that they're doing. It looks completely off. This is something that's not done anymore. Whatever it is, I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak too much to this. But there is an element that the people that are designing these ads, that are creating this propaganda, have to kind of move away from reality sometimes to make their point in 30 seconds. So there's not much criticism that I can give of that, because they have a short amount of time and they've got to kind of get their message across with a lot of impact. But is it effective? And for me, I don't think it's effective. And the reason is, again, everything I've said before, but also the fact that we don't necessarily have this type of calamity in Australia where, there needs to be that type of fear. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I think the government probably thinks it's a bad thing, because people need to be in more fear, and they're trying to create and ramp up the same type of fear that's maybe present in other parts of the world by showing us these images of the virus affecting very young people to push a certain demographic to go get vaccinated now. Now, if we look at commercials from around the world, I've got snippets of ads from other Western countries, and Singapore as well, a country in Asia. I just want to show you these commercials and the way these governments are approaching their population, because it's a lot different to what the Australian government has decided to do is the best thing for Australia. So let's have a look at the UK.
24 little hours brought the sun and the flowers where there used to be rain.
One step ahead of me.
That they made.
Just a sharp
There's a rainbow before me.
That's it. Not bad at all.
Skies
I got it done.
Can't be stormy.
Would you like a red or blue one?
Since the moment
Thank you for coming.
place.
Biggest turnout of the season.
Join the millions already vaccinated. To protect yourself and others, you need 2 doses for maximum protection.
Alright, so that was from the UK. So you see that ad. This is kind of the format of most of the vaccine commercials I've seen overseas. It includes some form of recognition of the people delivering the vaccine. So whether it's the nursing staff, doctors, whatever it is, it has people generally lining up for a vaccine or receiving the shot, and then it has their kind of reaction afterwards, or it's kind of created in like a very realistic type of way. Now, I'm not sure specifically if these were real people that were getting the vaccine, and these are real, nurses and doctors that are administering the vaccine, but the acting and the way they're portraying it is really good, because it's realistic and it comes across like that. Now, whether that's effective, again, people have different reactions to these things, but overall, it's a message of hope for the people in the UK that they can go get the vaccine, and maybe things might return to normal based on that, at least for themselves, because you have the last shots with the lady returning back to her family in the car. Now, we have an ad from France.
Hold on, don't let me go. Your first name is free, last name is dumb, but you still believe in where we're from. Man's white flower, it's in every...
Yeah, so you kind of get the point of that, right? That's the French ad. So it's a bit different to the one from the UK. So it's next level of propaganda, because now you have visuals being cut between people receiving their shots. So you got people getting the jab at the same time as the jab's going in. You have doors opening, you have a stove being turned on, you have things that are normal reoccurring again when the jab goes into your arm. So that's the next level of propaganda. So you have the very kind of basic stuff in the UK where it's a bit more realistic and a bit more about hope and showing the reality of things, and then you go to the French version, which is like, oh, it's a bit more creative, jab yourself and things open up. Maybe the French people just need it to be more literally shown to them. This is what's going to happen. Maybe they're not as bright. Who knows? All right, let's go to Canada now.
It all starts with one small action, but even the smallest action can create a ripple. If enough of us do our part by getting vaccinated, that ripple can become a wave. We can all help get there by getting vaccinated.
All right, so that was Canada. So that's a very highly polished advertisement because it's also shot in a studio. There's a particular theme, a message, and it kind of builds up to that. So again, you have the same kind of elements, get the shot, and life progresses back to normal. So this is the Canada government's propaganda, and this is kind of like the first version from England and the version from France, but this is all put together in a studio environment. So this is how the Canadian government is approaching it. Let's go to New Zealand, our closest neighbors, right? Let's have a look what they're doing in New Zealand.
Hey, COVID! You're a bit of an egg in 2028. Hey, boys.
Yeah. And we see you making plans for 21, 22, and the rest of ever.
But guess what? We got plans too.
Because we're over fighting and we're ready to win.
Watch out.
Because you know what this is? It's the metaphorical door to freedom.
I'm going back home to see my mum.
No more cancelling.
No more cancelling.
And we're locking in a date for a big fab wedding. No doubt.
Woo! We're going to keep coming here every day all year long.
So you got a similar kind of theme in New Zealand, but they've done it a bit more differently, right? They've involved the community. They've got a bit more, slang, local terms in there that are very kind of patriotic in a sense, because it talks about what everyone else in the country normally does in their lives when they whether it's be talking about sport or whatever it is. It's like a fun take on New Zealand culture and the people, and it really shows that you can get your freedom back maybe by taking this vaccine. But interestingly, there was no shot at all of anyone receiving the jab. There was a clinician type person opening a door to freedom, but you don't really have that scene of people getting jabbed. So it's again taking it to another layer where it's more subliminal messaging about freedom. And do I think this is an effective ad compared to the others? Yes, it could be in a certain way, because it appeals to people's innate feelings about the country in a way, because it represents them as a community, not so much as a product that the government wants to be seeded, jabbed, to have the freedom returned. We'll have to take a look at Singapore now.
Don't wait and see. Better get your shot. Steady from BP. Hey, faster go and vaccinate. Don't delay you wait. V is for vaccine. V is for victory over COVID. Don't play. I got my shot. Get yours too, okay? Your father never teach you.
All right, so that was Singapore's commercial, and that's a whole different type of advertising and propaganda, right? So it's a bit more fun. I think this is due to some sort of celebrity. They're singing a song, they got a tune. It's totally different to all the other commercials we've seen from parts of the world. The closest one is probably the New Zealand ad, right? But this one takes it to another level by making the whole process of getting a vaccine and opening up the country a lot more fun. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is particularly in parts of Asia, it's very hard to sell government propaganda to the people through advertising. A lot of people don't believe in the bullcrap from their governments, right? So you got to dress it up in a different way and make it fun and appealing, and almost make it like this kind of skit thing, and like take the government completely out of it. And I think this is what this kind of ad tries to do in sending this propaganda to the people of Singapore, because it's very hard, I know, in parts of Asia to trust anything that the government's telling you. So you have to dress it up in this way. Now, there is one ad that I've seen from the United States, and in my opinion, this is kind of the ad that would be more effective in Australia and to our audience. Now, there's lots of different ads in the United States, and this is just one example. But the reason I think this is a bit more effective and a bit more, a more worthwhile use of our taxpayer dollars, if they're going to make ads anyway, right? If they're going to make these ads anyway, why waste the money on fear porn, which is what they've done so far. This particular ad is from the US. I'll just play it now.
I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, the park across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut trees, the wishing well.
Well, that's the one from the US, and as you can see, it's a lot different to all the other ones that we've watched so far, right? So there's no nurses, there's no doctors, there's no jabs, there's nothing like this. It's more of like a little story. You still have the same kind of propaganda, right? You got the old lady grandma, the doorbell rings because she's been alone, and then all of a sudden it opens, and then the family's back. So things kind of returning to normal, right? And that's all thanks to the vaccine. But overall, there's not that kind of fear-mongering. It still kind of gets that point across. It doesn't have to go to all these other little bits of facts and, all this kind of stuff about vaccine rollouts and what we have to do and, arm yourself and all these kind of things. The message is very clear and it's very simple. And these kind of commercials are not hard to make. And I think it would work with an Australian audience, unlike the one that the government's put out yesterday, which is just complete and total fear-mongering. Overall, the biggest problem I think the government has here with vaccine hesitancy has nothing that can be solved with an ad campaign, because all these things are linked. These ads will only really appeal to a certain demographic that the government's trying to attract. People who are, in the category where they're very hesitant, or as the media likes to call them, anti-vaxxers, are not going to be swayed by this type of campaign. So the government, I think, really needs to focus on having campaigns which are about telling the community, look, go get a vaccine and, things will get to normal, which is what most countries are doing, but do it in a way that's more, doesn't really attack the people who are hesitant, doesn't really try to get them emotionally, doesn't try to get them by using fear. It's not looking at the people in Australia as being very smart and intelligent by just trying to approach them with fear. What they can be doing is, on the other side of it, the government can be putting out messaging telling people that, hey, look, we're not going to restrict your freedom if you don't get the vaccine. We're not going to have vaccine passports. We're not going to do all these things. And if they start doing messaging like this in the public as well, what that creates is less people in the community who are against these vaccines. Because the biggest problem you're having right now is, and the reason that people are hesitant, is because they feel like they're being forced by the government to do this, to contribute, forced through fear, forced through things like vaccine passport discussions and what we would call coercion. And that's very much the feeling that you get from the latest ad from the government. Whereas if they had just a normal generic advertising campaign telling people the benefits of getting a vaccine, like the one that I showed you from the US, and at the same time their policy that they're discussing in the public was that we're going to treat people in Australia with respect, we're going to treat workers in Australia with respect, we're going to treat people, give them the choice about what they want to do, you would have less people discussing these vaccines in a negative manner in the public, and you would have more people open to the idea of possibly getting a vaccine because it's a choice that they're making for their own lives. This is my take, and I know that it's not ever going to happen. The government's not ever going to go out there and try to do stuff without inducing some sort of fear and propaganda in this kind of negative sense. But that would I think would be effective, but they're worried about doing something more creative like that and being more transparent with the people in Australia. Well, thanks for watching everyone, and see you guys next time.